Hello everyone and welcome to the Council of Elrond. On today's episode we're going to be looking at the warriors of evil and the ground troops in Sauron's armies. The first liners and the creatures that nobody feels bad about killing. The Orcs. Now, if you're like me and you saw Peter Jackson's movies in the cinema at a young age, I'm sure they freaked the hell out of you too, because I definitely had nightmares after seeing these hellish monstrosities on the big screen. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, they're disgusting.
Yeah.
And the PG rating was it PG or 12's the first one? I think it was.
Maybe PG-12s? I'm not sure.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely
spooky.
Definitely spooky. Yeah, that one, all the orcs and the ghouly ghouls and the Nazgul. But so that's what we're looking at today. And we're also going to be looking at the Uruk-hai and goblins and discussing differences between these foul fiends.
Disgusting differences. Yeah.
We also have a quick announcement to make before we crack into the episode, and that is to ask all of you listeners to please mark your calendars for this Friday, the 15th of July. We will be releasing a video exclusively to YouTube reviewing the new trailer for the Rings of Power, which comes out this Thursday, the 14th. So it won't be out on the podcast, only on YouTube. So please head over there to the channel, check it out. As we'll be going through the teaser trailer, we'll be reviewing it, giving our thoughts. And I mean, it's always easier to talk about visual details when we can show it on the screen and show the image from the trailer so that everyone knows what we're talking about. We're all on the same page. So that's why we thought it might be better to do this one on YouTube rather than on the podcast. So go mark your diaries. Also, our YouTube channel, in case you don't know, can be found in the episode description section, and it's called The Mellon Heads with 2 L's. And while you're there, please drop us a follow and join that melon tree. Also, check out our Patreon page where we provide extra Mellon Head chats and insights along with our full-length videos and lots of other good stuff. So go check that out as well. I have to say a big thank you to our current patrons and a special thank you to Jack Knightley, who just signed up to our top tier and became our first Ranger of the Dunedain. So thank you, Jack, so much from the bottom of our hearts. And finally, if this podcast puts a smile on your face, please tell a friend about it. We really want to keep reaching as many people as possible. We want to keep this melon train moving. And now, on with the episode.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
Right, so the orcs. Anyway, firstly, we should know that orcs and goblins are basically the same. They're just different terminologies. So that's a thing that people very often get confused about. And maybe because of Peter Jackson's films. But Bilbo in the books usually referred to them as goblins and instead of orcs. And goblins actually like the new kind of slang that exists in Middle Earth. So hobbits as a creature or as a people would be more inclined to use slang and like the sort of updated lexicon rather than the elves or like noble men of Rohan who preferred to use the older, the more what they assumed would be the more proper speech kind of thing, I suppose. So yeah, that's like just the different way it was in terms of speech. Now, Peter Jackson obviously shows the goblins to be kind of these smaller, kind of green-skinned creatures and kind of slimy things like in the Misty Mountains. But that's just his own kind of view on things, and maybe that's something he wanted to do for whatever reason, just to make them a different kind of a creature. But there's even parts in the book where they refer to big goblins wearing the white hand mark. So that could mean that someone spotted like an Uruk-hai and called it a goblin. So there's definitely no connection to the goblins being like the smaller little mountain dwelling orcs or anything. It's just the vocabulary and the slang that people were using. So yeah, did you know about that?
Well, I mean, you touched on it there that that goblin is like the newer slang. I didn't know that, but it makes sense if hobbits are kind of relatively newer to Middle Earth than the other species. So like men have been around for a long, long time.
That's
Dwarves
true.
Even longer. Yeah. And then we've got elves who are the most ancient. So yeah, I suppose if you have hobbits are kind of like the kids, the younger generation. They've got like a new slang for them.
They're like what Gen Z.
Gen Z or millennials. No, Gen Z. What are we currently now?
I'm a millennial. What are you? Yeah, you're a millennial as well.
I'm a Gen Z.
Are you? Hardly.
I don't know. No, Gen X is the newest one, isn't it?
Oh, Gen X. I don't know. I've lost count. I don't really.
I don't know. Orcs and but yeah, that was actually one thing I probably preferred Do you remember when we did our Tolkien versus Jackson episodes and we talked about like Tolkien winning one and Jackson winning another?
Yeah.
I always loved the distinction between orcs and goblins, and I like the way in Moria when there's the goblins, they're like they're almost like ants. They travel in hundreds of thousands and they can climb on the walls, and they're more gross, and they haven't really seen. They're slimy.
They were almost they were slimier, and they're almost like kind of like frog-like, that they were kind of like sticking to the surfaces. That's why they were able to climb up the walls.
They've got like huge eyes, whereas like the orcs more so look more humanoid.
And again, maybe like orcs. There's loads of different types of orcs, and maybe if you're the type of creature that lives in caves and inside mountains for I don't know, millennia, and eventually maybe you will develop larger eyes because you need to see more in the dark. So I mean, maybe they were just orcs that Peter Jackson wanted to say. Like, I mean, I don't think there's any point where they specifically say these goblins are not orcs or anything. So maybe that's just our own perception.
It was confusing. I remember being confused because the Frodo's
that happens all the time, though.
Sting glows blue when orcs are near, but then when they're in Moria, Frodo pulls out a sword and it's blue, and then arrows come, and then Legolas grabs the arrows and he goes, "Goblins!" And I was like, is this goblins or is it orcs? Or does it glow blue for both?
There's
Do you remember
elf
that?
saying the word goblin, which I've basically just said shouldn't be. So there you go.
Yeah, but he's been hanging around with some hobbits, so he's catching on with the slang.
He's like, I'm young like you guys.
He's like, goblins. No, it's goblins. It's like, oh, sorry, I'm trying to get in with the younger Gen Z.
So anyway, that's just a little distinction between orcs and goblins, that basically they are the same thing. And Bilbo never really used the word orcs. I don't think. He was always saying the goblins. But the next question, Dave, I suppose, I was going to say a more difficult question, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Where do orcs come from, and what's their origin?
I mean, I don't know if we're going. Well, I remember watching. No, I think I was listening to Corey Olsen, the Tolkien professor, talking about this recently. It might have been in the Friendship Onion podcast or something. And I think from what I remember, he said there isn't really an answer, or Tolkien himself didn't have an established answer, but then his son, Christopher, went on to choose one side, which is that they were just corrupted beings, or Melkor had like twisted and changed, manipulated elves, and then crossbred them as well to make them orcs.
Yep.
So, but is that right, or is that what you?
Well,
going along
no,
with?
you are right that like I'll get into the different possibilities and the different things that Tolkien had kind of mused upon over the years.
I think one of the things he was talking about was the fact that there might have been a question posed. Do orcs have souls?
Classic.
Yeah, and he was basically like, we don't know the answer to this, because if we're going with what Tolkien's son had talked about, then technically there is a trapped elven soul in that orc, and will that orc be able to go to Valinor if it dies? And
exactly, it gets
not
pretty
really,
gets pretty philosophical.
It gets a bit messy there. Yeah. So
but that is true. But when you say that it was his son that kind of came up with it, it's not that. That's not the case. It's that Christopher Tolkien,
he kind of voted for that side.
Well, Christopher
right?
Tolkien is the one that he published the Silmarillion. We know that like the Silmarillion didn't get published in J.R.R. Tolkien's lifetime. So that was, made by Christopher Tolkien going through all of his notes, his father's notes, and kind of going through it. Now, that was probably the most developed idea that Tolkien had, and that's what Tolkien considered himself for the longest time. It was kind of later on in his life he sort of started to ponder different possibilities and different origin stories. But I'll explain that now in a moment. But basically, also another thing that's cool is if we go way back in time, so like before the First Age, back like to the Year of the Trees, it was when the first elves awoke on Middle Earth, and there was a Vala called Orome. He was the hunter. And he kind of just stumbled upon them one time. He used to just kind of like roam around Middle Earth on his like giant steed on his. I think of like The Witcher going around on a roach.
Oh, rust or roach, yeah.
Roach, just like wandering around. That's like Orome. And he kind of like stumbled upon these elves, and they were like the long-awaited and long-anticipated children of Iluvatar. Iluvatar was the god. He'd been like speaking about this for ages. One of these days now, I'm going to make these children of Iluvatar. They're going to be class. And so they were like, well anticipated. And so it was a big deal that he was like, oh my God, they're here. And but like at this stage, like, you know, for Avala, it was like, oh my God, you're here all of a sudden. They're like, we've been here for like thousands of years. But he was like, oh yeah, whatever. So like he didn't find them all in just like one big group or anything. Like they already had scattered all across the land. So he was kind of, then he was like, oh, I'm going to go around and see if I can find more of them and, you know, teach them things and like, you know, help them out, because he kind of started to love these elves. And, you know, he's just like, elves, I'm a big fan of you lads. And but of course, like Morgoth, who was you know, Sauron's boss, you know, the big bad in the first age, he obviously hated Orome, you know, no surprise there. So he started to want to, I know, yeah, he's just, you know,
The worst.
he's just the worst. He's such I don't know,
A Grinch.
yeah. So he started to like trick the elves into being afraid of Orome. So he sent out these kind of like evil spirits and shadows on horseback to kidnap elves, never to be seen again. And then the elves kind of presumed that this figure, this dark, like mysterious figure or shadow on a horse, they thought it was Orome traveling around and like kidnapping elves. And like, you know, they were like, we don't know what happens to them, but like, it's definitely not good. So then that was for the purpose so that if Orome did kind of come near some elves and they saw him, that then they'd be like, oh my God, that's him, let's hide. And let's not like, you know, let's not approach him. So that's kind of what Morgoth did. Now, another possibility is that Morgoth didn't actually send any shadows or anybody out, but he just kind of started spreading these rumors of this was what was happening. But either way, some of the elves were actually ended up being afraid of this Vala, this guy called Orome. And so they kind of didn't go towards him. And then if they did that, it was probably more likely that Morgoth would actually catch them and ensnare them. And basically what was said to have happened then was that he took them back and he put them in prison and he tortured them and corrupted them and twisted them and like all this kind of dark magic and you know, whatever weird techniques he was using, but he basically wanted to create this
Put loads of goo on them.
yeah exactly. Just like go down down to the shop to buy some jelly, and he was like, we'll smear this all over you. And then
it's like the Nickelodeon Kids Choice Awards, you know, when they do that big gunk thing and all the green goo just like comes or pours all over them. That's how
it was exactly like that. Yeah,
it was exactly like that.
He was putting pepper in their eyes. He was like, yeah, this is gonna make
no, make it
and then
stop.
they were like, ah. Yeah, so he was just trying to create some new vile creature, which was the orc. And now something else just to note on that is that no one else in the world has the power to create life except for Eru Iluvatar, which we've spoken about many times on this podcast. So we know that these orcs were created by taking some other life form and like torturing or mutilating it along with some, you know, dash of power or dark magic or whatever. So that was how
just a hint of disgusting. Oh my God.
Oh no, too much.
no, too much disgustingness.
So Morgoth obviously couldn't create life, but he could make a mockery of that which Iluvatar had made. And this twisting of Iluvatar's children was considered Morgoth's greatest sin against Iluvatar. And that's kind of a cool thing as well, that Iluvatar had been like planning this big, beautiful, you know, perfect race and perfect children of Iluvatar to be like just happy and singing songs and whatever. And then Morgoth was like, I'm gonna mess them up. Yeah, pretty sly. But then we get on to the kind of change in canon where it's now all of this information is from the Silmarillion, so that's published canon. So we can take that and say, yeah, that's the situation. But there are some inconsistencies which we get in the movies. So obviously, well, as I said already, Tolkien changed his mind over the years, and he didn't really settle on a definite answer. So the most common perception is that they were originally elves, but he actually started out with an older idea, which was that Morgoth made them out of slime or sorcery, which is, there's a quote saying, bred from the heats and slimes of the earth, which is from the Book of Lost Tales. So yes, that actually means that Peter Jackson's idea of kind of pulling them out of these like sort of mud pods is not actually as crazy as what other people make it out to be. And that's actually similar to kind of one of Tolkien's first thoughts, like being made out of the slime in the heats of the earth. So that's...
It doesn't really show orcs coming out that way though in the movies, doesn't it?
No, but sorry,
Uruk-hai.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
but
you know,
but I always imagined it, and I think what Peter Jackson is going for is that they shoved an orc in there and they shoved a man or shoved an orc and an elf, put them in the oven, turned it up to 200,
cooking
and
time,
then just like cook
20
it
years
for a while, and then out pops this like disgusting Uruk-hai. So
out of this cocoon.
like. Yeah, like I don't remember in the movies does it ever say where orcs come from, but this is where they talk about Uruk-hai being like twisted and manipulated.
But isn't that what
they were once elves and they were once men?
That's what Sauron says though when he's there chatting to Lurtz in the movie.
Do you know how the Orc first came to be?
And then he's like, how they were like, they were once elves, twisted and mutilated, whatever. And then he says, and now perfected my fighting Uruk-hai. Yeah.
Touche.
There you go. So, that's a kind of cool thing, that just kind of making them out of slime, and maybe that's where Peter Jackson got the idea to do that kind of little slime and mud cocoon sort of a thing. But anyway, also as Tolkien got older, he increasingly disliked the idea of orcs breeding with his precious elves. So he considered that they may in fact have been men originally who were taken and mutilated, and that's what they were. That was their origins, not elves. Or another one was that maybe they started out as some sort of wilder beasts, like monkeys, for example, who were then bred to have sort of orcish qualities. And there are also some notes from Tolkien saying that they could have that there could have been high beings like fallen Maiar spirits who took the shapes of orc in the early ages as well. And they would have been some, strong, powerful orcs. So that would have been kind of cool.
Fallen angels.
But then none of these other ideas were ever actually updated or, so then we should remember that the most canonically correct answer is that they were probably originally elves who were mutilated. So there you go. Yeah.
And like when you look at the stylization in the movies as well, they all have pointed ears. So I think that's kind of maybe a hint.
Maybe.
Towards where they came from. Maybe. Like, yeah, I suppose whenever you see those kind of ghouly ghouls in any other fantasy series, they probably have pointed ears as well. But maybe it's just a little Peter Jackson, like, this is where they come from.
This is what they
come from, pointy-eared elves.
Anyway, there are many, many different types of orcs. So we're going to look at the different kinds of orcs now. And
nice.
So there are lots of like creatures that fall under the kind of orc umbrella title, I suppose. And I'm sure many more existed, but here are some that we know a little bit about at least. So let's start with the obvious one, the Uruk-hai. So tell me about the Uruk-hai, Dave. Are they badass?
Oh, they're badass. They're created and bred, designed not to run from battle, even though they do at Helm's Deep. But that's the reason that they don't have any armor on their back, because they're not supposed to run away. They don't fear. They can travel in sunlight, which apparently orcs can't do, but they kind of do in the movies. So I don't know. That's a little strange. But yeah, they're faster, bigger, better, stronger. Go through sunlight.
Everything that Kanye West says.
Exactly,
or Daft Punk, I suppose.
Harder, better, faster, stronger.
Harder, better, faster, stronger.
But they're also literally bred for war, which orcs are just kind of... Orcs can be anything, like they're kind of useless, stumbling, bumbling idiots. But Uruk-hai are just designed to kill and fight. Fighting Uruk-hai.
The fighting Uruk-hai. Yeah. They're mentioned as the fighting Uruk-hai quite a few times actually in the books as well. But yeah, that's exactly correct. Now, something interesting is that the word Uruk actually means orc. So that's in black speech. Uruk is the word for orc, and hai means folk or like people. Hi. Okay. Yeah. So basically, what is Uruk-hai? It's just like orc folk is what their title is as well. So
lazy name.
Well, I mean, also the word hai, which means folk, is used in other areas as well. Actually, in Middle Earth, there's they use it in trolls, where there's actually a troll that was called the Olog-hai, and these were like an advanced breed of troll that had been improved and were like less vulnerable to sunlight and things like that as well. So it's like maybe the orc hai is kind of like they add on this little word which means like folk, but it kind of just means like the next level, I suppose. It's kind of like,
it's like
updated.
High orc.
High orc,
it's almost like, the high general or the high hello. Yeah, it's cool. I like it.
So that's basically, so what we should remember is that they're not just these completely two different species. Uruks are orcs. That's what they are as well. So, just like, as a human race, you can't be just like, see one human and be like, he's a human, and to see someone from like a different part of the world be like, he can't be a human. It's like, no, different places, different beings.
He's a higher human.
Exactly.
He's living in Jamaica.
Yeah. He's really high. So the Uruks, now one thing that I would say is that we should know that they were not created by Sauron. they were actually instead first bred by Sauron, like maybe 1,000 years before before Sauron started to, do his own little version. And these first ones were known as the Black Uruks, and they were the first to use that title of Uruk. But Sauron did breed his own ones then at a later point as well. And so, yeah, as you said before, they're basically the same as orcs, but, well, they're the same breed, but they are bigger, faster, stronger, smarter, and they don't get weakened by sunlight, basically. Now, all orcs would be able to travel in sunlight, but they would weaken, and they don't like it. Uruks can travel by sunlight, and they don't weaken, but they also don't like it. They would prefer to travel at night. But they just kind of hate the sun. But, it's fine. They're just like, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like maggoty bread. So like, oh, go on, whatever, we'll have
we don't have enough sun cream in the orc land. So
now it's not clear as well how the Uruks were created, but obviously again, some use of Sauron's dark power, or maybe they were orcs bred with men, or some other hybrid that's just like the nicest, not the nicest thing to dwell on. So we should move on. So the next.
Well, I mean, before you actually move on, isn't that just another amazing thing about Tolkien's Middle Earth in comparison to like other fantasy book series and things? Because I don't know, maybe I'm just ignorant, but I don't think if you're reading Aragon or any other big fantasy series, you're hardly like delving into where exactly did they come from and how were they manipulated and do they have souls?
Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like things like that. It just makes Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, and all Tolkien's
the
books,
reason
it just makes them so much more top tier.
Exactly. We look into these deep facts because we almost take it like, well, obviously that information must exist somewhere because it's like real life.
It's like ancient history.
Exactly, because the whole thing is so
like
developed.
Where is the answer? Not like, why didn't the creator write an answer? It's there somewhere. I think everyone feels like he has it in his mind somewhere. And
of course.
He's dead,
he's
which
pondered
is annoying.
everything. Yeah, exactly. But it's more like we've lost the answer, not that it was never created. It's like it was,
Yeah, no, it's annoying, but I do treat it like ancient history, and that's how it should be treated, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So let's look at some other maybe lesser known creatures who fall under that orc umbrella title as well, as they called it before. So the first ones are guys that were called Snaga. Now, Snaga was a kind of contemptuous term for the lesser orcs of both Mordor and Isengard, and it was especially used among the larger, stronger Uruk-hai, and they would call other ones use Snaga. And it basically, in Black speech, it means like slave or servant. And so that's the title of kind of these sort of entire race of orcs. However, question for you, where in the movies do we see an orc called Snaga? And which orc was he?
Oh, yeah, it's one. Is it the orc at Cirith that's fighting the Uruk?
Now, I should say there's actually two Snagas, so yeah.
Okay.
Could be.
Half right.
No,
so so that guy that basically...
But there's another one.
Like, I'm gonna gut you like a stuck pig. That guy?
Yeah. Him. And
All
then
right.
the other guy is a guy that we quote more often.
Oh. Is it the guy that goes, yeah, they're fresh?
Yeah.
That guy?
Yeah. Why can't we have some meat? That guy, yeah.
Yeah.
So, he's also called Snaga. Who was he played by?
Two
Who's the
Snagas.
actor that played him, Dave?
That's Jed Brophy, right?
That's correct.
It's gotta be.
That's correct. It is Jed Brophy. But here's something that I
Legend.
think maybe you don't know. Jed Brophy didn't voice that actor, or that didn't voice that orc. Who voiced that orc?
Is it someone I know? Is it someone from the trilogy? Oh, I think I heard this. Is it a member of the Fellowship?
No.
All right, then I haven't heard this.
Who do you think they got? They're like, we need someone to voice someone in the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, Andy Serkis.
Yep, that was Andy Serkis that does that like
Nice.
fresh. That whole thing,
Yeah.
So
I think I had heard that. Maybe I got confused with the whole Fellowship thing. Yeah.
No, maybe
Very
you're
good.
thinking of. I told you in a different podcast that it was Dom Monaghan who plays Merry, who was the voice for Gollum initially in the Prophecy at the first movie, where he's like, "What you already said today, lost, my precious, is lost," or whatever. Yeah, that was Donny Monaghan that shouted that. So maybe that was what you were thinking
Mad.
of. So there you go.
Maybe. All my wires are just crossing at the moment, so I
Exactly.
don't know. I'm thinking of
So yeah,
crazy things right now.
those are the Snaga orc, and the next orc that I have is called the Snuffler. And now this was another type of orc that was basically smaller with these kind of wide nostrils, and he was sort of like a tracker. He was the tracking orc, and he had great. Do you remember in the movies? He's like they're Uruk-hai at the time, and he's
What's
like,
that? What do you smell?
What do you smell? And it's like, I always thought, like, why is he asking him what he smells when he's the same? I was like, what do you smell yourself? Like, I mean, what's wrong with you? Do you have a runny nose or something? You can't smell it yourself. So
I've got the snuffles.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I always thought that was kind of weird, but maybe that's also what Peter Jackson was trying to show, that like some orcs were better at like actually smelling and picking up on scents and things like that. So that's the way it was in the books. So there are these snufflers that
I mean, it was probably just exposition. He wanted someone to be like, what's that smell? It's man flesh.
No,
By the way,
Peter Jackson knew exactly what he was doing. All right.
if anyone wants to check out that scene, that's said in just regular men talking, you've seen that,
class.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
where it's like,
a few of them.
what do you smell? Yeah. Man flesh. Oh,
yeah.
It's such a funny clip.
It's brilliant.
Wow.
Yeah. And they've done a few of those. I think they've done the one.
They have.
What about their legs? Yeah. What about their legs?
Yeah.
They don't need those.
They don't need those.
Yeah. Really good. It's really good.
It's very good.
So yeah. So there, Snuffler. Something else that's kind of cool. Now there's the next one that we will look at would be the Orcs of Mordor, which were the Mordor Orcs, I suppose they were also known as. And they were just the foot soldiers of Sauron within the Black Land of Mordor. So there was a distinction between Mordor orcs and then the orcs that were from Isengard. So then we look at what things did Sauron actually create himself, and he created these things called half-orcs. So these were basically like large evil men who possessed orc-like features, basically. And they fought alongside the Dunlendings in the Battle of the Hornburg, at the Battle at Helm's Deep. And there's a quote here from Treebeard in the Two Towers, and he says, quote, "Are they men he has ruined, or has he blended the races of orcs and men?" So he's kind of just sort of thinking out loud there, but he's saying like he doesn't know if they're like blended between the two races or just men that he's actually ruined. So these half orcs were spies and warriors used by Sauron during the time that he was trying to, come into power in the late Third Age. And they were probably like bred by some crazy and disturbing combination of orcs and men, but they're only mentioned once in the books. So Frodo says to the Fellowship when he's leaving Bree, he says, quote, "So that's where that Southerner is hiding. He looks more than half like a goblin," referring to the squint-eyed Southerner who was an outlaw from Dunland, and he was an agent of Saruman, and he'd go around selling pipeweed. So now they refer to him as the squint-eyed Southerner, and what does that remind you of, Dave?
Squint from The Hobbit.
Yeah, the Squint. He was called the Squint.
The Squint, yeah. Who's played by Matthew something.
Yeah,
Can't remember his name.
for those of our listeners who aren't aware of this, in the Hobbit movies, there's the scene that, like the Desolation of Smaug. The second movie opens up where we're in Bree and Gandalf is meeting Thorin, and there's a couple of like dodgy looking characters that are kind of, they're chasing after Thorin, and then
and Bill Ferny Sr.
Exactly. So who we interviewed on this podcast as well. We interviewed Bill Ferny Sr.
It's a great one. Check it out if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, shout out. So he and this other character who was called the Squint, they were the two guys that were kind of these sort of dodgy characters there, and then we never actually hear their names being said, but they come up in their in the credits as the Squint. So maybe that's what they're referring to. And so Frodo here is referring to some squint-eyed Southerner, some kind of dodgy like drug dealer in The Hobbit who is going around selling pipeweed, and he said he looks.
I knew a couple of those in school.
Yeah, he looks more than half like a goblin. So he could have been a half orc. Now there was also another breed called Goblin Men, who were similar to half orcs, and they also fought in the Battle of the Hornburg, and they too didn't mind sunlight because they were kind of like half men, I suppose. So from the book Morgoth's Ring, we are told that men under the domination of Morgoth or his agents could after generations, become more like the orcs and even willing to mate with them, producing newer breeds that were larger and more cunning. And it says there's no doubt that Sauron rediscovered this in the Third Age, either by trial or error, or by reading about it. So again, kind of gross.
I don't know why that meme just pops into my head. You know, the one of Mike Tyson where he's holding two pigeons and he's like, "Now kith." That's what this reminds me of. Just Saruman there, like, all right, I'm just gonna light a candle in between this orc and this man and see what happens.
Put a plate of spaghetti between the two of them and see if they can get like a lady in the Tramp moment.
Don't eat him. Just do other stuff and enjoy it.
Yeah,
just have a good time. Just have a reach around and see what happens. Kind
of disturbing, some of these thoughts if you actually think about them for a while. But anyway, the exact difference between goblin men and half orcs was kind of unclear. They were basically the same, but they were referred to in the books as separate breeds. So that's the only reason that I mentioned.
And they're only mentioned like once or twice as well, right?
Exactly.
I remember that when I was reading the chapter on Helm's Deep, and it's just talking about orcs and Uruk-hai and goblin men, and I'm like, what are all these things? Like, before I read the book, I had a very specific separation of the tiers in my head.
Same as,
you know, from the movies. There was goblins, then there was the Uruk-hai, but then there was the Mordor Uruk-hai who were a bit shaggier, and then but like then when you're reading the books, they just like throw an extra word in there. It's like and goblin men and half orcs and 3/4 men, and you're like, what's going on here?
And the orcs who like to go surfing, them lads. And they were whatever.
The surf orcs.
Yeah. So there was like half orcs and goblin men. There was also hobgoblins, which is another one. A name just thrown out there. I think that was for like the larger kinds of orcs that were found in Middle Earth. But so
the
like
ones that like hobnobs.
Exactly. So yeah, as you said, they're all lots of them are just mentioned a couple of times where there's a point where Bilbo says, like goblins and hobgoblins and orcs and blah, blah, blah. He just mentions like a few of them. And then there's another part at the Battle of Helm's Deep where Gambling says, he refers to there were goblin men and half orcs. Like he refers to both of them in the same sentence. So we're kind of going, okay, well, they were both there and they're obviously two different types of breeds. But honestly, we don't really know much more about those. But the last thing I would say is that in his late post Lord of the Rings writings, Tolkien said that he preferred the spelling of orc to be O-R-K, in fact, which is just his kind of most updated spelling as well. So again, that's not published in the actual original series, so we should take the canon to be O-R-C. But that was just how Tolkien developed himself going later on. So that's...
He literally was on the deathbed. He was like, I just want to throw a spanner in the works here. Aragorn was an Uruk-hai, you know, like orcs is spelled with a K. Everyone's like losing their mind.
No, but you know, like Tolkien and his whole, you know, understanding of language and...
I know, but like you write thousands of pages of material and it's spelled one way and then you're like, by the way, I prefer it this way. Good night.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go.
It's funny. Yeah,
so
interesting.
Lots of different kinds of orcs there to kind of freak you out, or for you to scare children at bedtime if you want to tell them about half orcs and goblin men and ghoulie ghouls and hobgoblins and whatever. So yeah,
when you talked about Treebeard, Treebeard specifically refers to goblin. Oh no, sorry, he refers to half orcs, and that doesn't he's kind of not sure what they are. Isn't that right in the quote? Or he said just the quote that you read out earlier.
The quote I just read.
Yeah.
What does he say again? Treebeard says that the quote is, "Are they men he has ruined, or has he blended the races of orcs and men?" So that's speaking about these kind of half orcs. Yeah.
So that like suggests that these half orcs almost look identical to men.
Yeah.
And they might be a little bit slimier, a little bit, you know, more bruised and corrupted. But then again, like Treebeard can't tell the difference between hobbits and orcs. So I don't know. He's not a very
well. That is kind of true. And
that guy needs some tree glasses.
But yeah, so what we should think is that the half orcs and the goblin men, they aren't like, when you look at them, you could be just like, ugh, that's a really horrible looking person there. And so that's why this guy that Frodo mentions, like the squint-eyed southerner, he's like, I think there's some fan art as well. If you go online and you look up the Squint Eyed Southern, you'll find some people drawings, and he just looks like this kind of just deformed guy with these like squinty eyes, and so he was kind of just this like dodgy character that would like roam around and, as I said, sell pipeweed and stuff. So and just basically do the bidding of Saruman and things like that. So they weren't just like, now also we don't really know exactly what orcs in general looked like. We've got descriptions from the books, but what we see in our mind from Peter Jackson's movies was basically just Peter Jackson's kind of idea. Maybe they were just like really, really ugly and horrible looking people, basically. They were kind of a bit hunched over. Maybe that they looked more like kind of Gollum, We don't really know exactly, but we do know that they kind of certain general
the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Possibly.
Something like that.
Just sort of kind of deformed and kind of, I don't know. But anyway, let's move on and let's ask a question that maybe you may have seen from the Tolkien Professor as well, which is that if the orcs are bred from elves, not only do they have souls, but were the orcs immortal?
Were they immortal?
Elves are immortal.
Jeez. That's true. I don't think so, because they're bred in, like they're crossbred. So it's like they're not even like a full.
They're inbred.
Functioning. They're inbred as well. And actually, that was one thing that Peter Jackson wanted to show. I think the way he designed the Uruk-hai and the orcs, he wanted to have them like peeling in the face and having lots of like spots and ugly things. So
because they're inbred.
Because they're inbred, they're like a sandwich,
and they only eat maggoty bread.
Yeah,
maggoty inbred.
Maggoty inbred. I'm just gonna say that just by design and the way that they're created, that they're going to eventually like decompose and like
just fall apart,
wear away. Yeah, like they're too gross.
They are pretty gross.
I don't know.
I don't think they're. Don't think their bodies are just going to continue working for as long as the elves, I suppose. But anyway, the answer to this is that Tolkien himself recognized that this was a bit of a problem in his writing, and in volume 10 of the History of Middle Earth, there's actually a short essay entitled Orcs, and in it Tolkien muses a bit on where they came from, and this is like when he was starting to think of different possibilities of origins and all that kind of stuff. So he does have, like, he talks about the different possibilities of their origins, because this was again long after the Silmarillion had been written and he was starting to change his mind. So he does have this one interesting paragraph where he says, "They needed food and drink and rest, though many were trained as tough dwarves in enduring hardship. They could be slain and they were subject to disease. But apart from all these ills, they died and were not immortal, even according to the nature of the Quendi. Indeed, they appear to have been by nature short-lived compared with men of higher race, such as the Edain." So Edain is just a line of men that were quite noble. Quendi is kind of just like elves. So that's just for if you don't understand what he was saying there. So basically, he's saying their orcs are not immortal. And he does go on to clarify that in the elder days, as I said earlier, some of Morgoth's servants were perhaps Maiar, and therefore immortal, and they could have taken on whatever shape they wanted. So they could have taken on the shapes of orcs in order to lead other orcs into battle, maybe, So that, and there's a quote here saying, "Thus it was that the histories speak of great orcs or orc captains who were not slain and who reappeared in battle through years far longer than the span of the lives of men." So there you go. That could be a Maiar who's just like, in disguise as an orc, I suppose.
And like it kind of makes sense that they're, if you're to put orcs alongside men, you'd say they're more similar to like the Dunedain, or you said the Edain. It's not like they're blessed with long life, but it's almost like sometimes long life in fantasy series is not just like Tolkien, but just in general. It's almost like, cursed with long life. They're being forced to like roam the earth longer than others. And like Gollum as well. Like Gollum, he lives to over 500 years old, and it's kind of like that's his curse. He has to hold on to this ring and this addiction.
Exactly.
And
in the prophecy, in the prophecy, Kate Blanchett, sorry to interrupt, says that the ring brought to him unnatural long life. So even just from that wording, unnatural long life, and then you see him and he's just this horrible looking creature for the first time. You're like, oh right, yeah, it's not natural to live for that long.
It's kind of like in the last Star Wars movie where Darth Sidious says something like, what does he say?
You mean the most recent one?
Yeah, the most recent one where he's like,
something
are more unnatural.
Oh,
You're like, there's the answer. That's why he's alive. But yeah, I would imagine like orcs, they could like one random orc could live to 200 years old and get killed. Another could probably live to like 500 and then he just dies of disease.
Yeah, they didn't live the healthiest lifestyles anyway, you know. And they were kind of
whereas when you hear of elves being immortal, you're like, this is a beautiful being that will just stay beautiful until the end of time, unless it's killed. But and they don't really like suffer from diseases.
Yeah, you can just imagine the elves like morning skin routine is flawless. Like they get up and they're like, okay, I'm gonna have a bath in milk, and then I'm gonna do my eyes and whatever. And it's like really taking care of
some of that orc goo on my cheeks.
The orcs are just like, they're drinking grog and having fights and like, probably just, I don't know, I'm going to see how long I can keep my hand in the fire kind of thing, They're just idiots, like, so.
Oh, that's a fun game.
But there is a case, there is one specific mention of orcs who had long lifespan, and there's a story of the two of some of the most famous orc chieftains, which were Azog and Bolg. Now Azog was Bolg's father. Bolg was the chieftain of the orcs who attacked Erebor in the Battle of the Five Armies. That was in 2941, and Azog was killed in a battle in 2799. So that was years and years earlier. So Bolg had to be at least 150 years old by the time of that battle. So that's where you can just see the 2 years. Okay, here's the year that the father died and the son was in a battle over here 150 years later. So it stands to reason that it was minimum 150 years old. So that's one example of that. But I mean, like you said, maybe there was some like examples, which we see a lot in the Lord of the Rings, was the race of the like Edain or the Dunedain, where they were blessed with long life, so they'd live a little bit longer than most men, maybe like twice the length or something like that. So maybe that existed for orcs as well. But anyway, there you go. So that's the answer to that.
Yeah, well, it's almost as well like they're elves that are corrupted. So elves were immortal, and it's like they're so badly and disgustingly corrupted that they're still technically elves, but their lifespan reduces to maybe 200 or 300 years or 400 years, or like depending on the orc. I suppose that's my.
They're just orcs that really didn't take care of themselves, I suppose. Yeah, sorry, they're like elves that just really like they're like just letting it all fall apart. They've never seen the inside of a gym.
I'd love to know an orc that died of natural causes as well. Like what? Like their natural causes is probably disease and beheading.
Yeah, but I'd say
natural
like,
causes.
I'd say like 90% didn't die from natural causes. I think it was really unusual for an orc to die of natural causes because the lifestyles that they lead.
Maybe when they got old and like useless, they would just be killed by one of the tribe members. They're always fighting. Like Tolkien actually talks about orcs fighting with each other all the time.
Oh yeah. So, and they ate each other. So like I mean maybe when the older
Cannibals.
people like so they're like which we get a nice nice shot of in Peter Jackson's movies as well, of where he cuts off his head and they just start eating him. So it's like so I mean they did do that. So obviously maybe if they saw other older orcs that was a sign of weakness, they were like, we could just kill him and eat him. So I mean, who's up for that? If we let him get older, the meat's getting even worse. Like so we might as well kill him now. So but yeah, that's and now that's something that I kind of want to move on to now, which is who were orcs loyal to? So for instance, were the Isengard Uruk-hai loyal only to Saruman? Or like, did the Witch King have his own loyal orcs? Or were all orcs in their core like loyal to Sauron? So what do you think about that?
That's a good question, and one I've never thought about before. But like, yeah, if you're looking at the movies, you have the Uruk-hai, Saruman's Uruk-hai are definitely loyal to Saruman because he breeds them. I suppose they're all originally loyal to Morgoth and Melkor because that's where they're kind of created from, and most would probably answer to Sauron. But like it's not out of love or anything. They all like fear Sauron, so I'd imagine he if he wanted, he could command any orc to do whatever he wanted and get them to do his bidding. But yeah, I suppose like you said, the Witch King Saruman, there's probably all different factions of orcs that would be loyal to whatever leader that they have at the time, but maybe in total I would say Melkor would be, or Morgoth would be, their absolute leader.
Sure, of course, and definitely
Sauron.
originally that would have been the case. But you need to also remember what like the intelligence of the orcs and their knowledge of history. They're probably not the most learned people. Like, so we're speaking thousands of years after they. I
just mean like almost in their DNA and in their gene.
Possibly,
it's like, yeah. I would follow Melkor if he, and like with Melkor not there, it's kind of like Sauron is the next in command, and they're like, I'm just going to go with him because his voice sounds nice, and I don't know, there's something in my bones.
Maybe
it's telling me to go.
And dogs are loyal to humans, but then again, I've got a boss. Is my dog like, oh, I need to be loyal to your boss because he's higher than you or something? So I mean, probably
it's
not.
True.
So now anyway, so if we go back and think of, for example, a couple of the orcs that we see in the movies, where we get like Snaga again, who was the like they're fresh kind of guy, and then his other mate who was called Grishnak, who was the other guy in the conversation that was like, what about their legs? They don't need those. Yeah. So them two lads. So they were mentioned a lot in the books, and we actually kind of know quite a bit of those. And Grishnak, he was an orc from Mordor, and he was kind of in charge of that group. The guy that's kind of like, they don't need those. He was like the boss, and he was trying to move the company of orcs who captured Merry and Pippin. He was trying to move them towards an area where there was a Nazgul waiting. But Ugluk, who was the Uruk-hai from Sauron, he had orders from Sauron to bring the hobbits back to Isengard. And so while Grishnak was trying to make the group go east, here's what Ugluk said. He says, quote, "What's happened to your precious Nazgul? Has he had another mount shot under him? Now, if you'd brought him along, that might have been useful, if these Nazgul are all they make out." And then Grishnak said, "Nazgul, Nazgul," said Grishnak, shivering and licking his lips, as if the word had a foul taste that he savoured painfully. You speak of what is deep beyond the reach of your muddy dreams, Ugluk," he said. "Nazgul, all they make out. One day you'll wish you had not said that. Ape," he snarled fiercely. So there is just a little example of some differences that's between the group of orcs, and not only is it that they don't follow the same rank of command, i.e., Sauron at the top, and then lower levels with like the Witch King and where the Nazgul would be. But there's some guys from Isengard who don't even really respect the Nazgul, and they probably don't even know that much about them. And as for why the Nazgul was waiting for the delivery of the hobbits and not in the field with them, there had been another Nazgul who had been shot down by Legolas a few days before. So it seems as though Sauron maybe told them not to cross the river and to wait until the war would actually begin. So... But it seems like Ugluk had no idea that his lord, Sauron, was actually the servant of another lord. Like I said, my dog wouldn't know that I have a boss or my lord or whatever. So maybe they don't really think about those kind of things.
Isn't Saruman at that time kind of plotting against Sauron? So
yeah,
he has his own. He's not really like, he is working for Sauron, but at the same time he's got his own motive. So
true.
Whatever way he breeds these Uruk-hai and trains them, he's probably saying, "You work for me." Like,
yeah,
of
course,
I'm your boss.
But again, just the simplest idea would probably just be that they don't even really, they know of, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of that place Mordor, I've heard of Sauron, but they don't really give too much importance to it. They're kind of just like, yeah, whatever.
To answer your question again, I don't think any of them have any huge loyalty to anyone, but I just feel like there is some sort of, if Sauron was to click his fingers and command as many orcs as he could, you'd get 90% of them doing whatever he wanted.
It's true.
But I don't think, but what if like Sauron and Saruman were to go to war against each other? Like, I don't know how that would pan out.
If there was like a head-to-head battle of Sauron versus Saruman, and Sauron defeated Saruman, then they'd all probably see Sauron's strength, and that's probably what they would go, and they would go, okay, we need, if there was that obvious oh, their master is a stronger, we should go and serve him because that's, but they probably just don't know. They probably just aren't. Like, I mean, the Uruk-hai are quite intelligent compared to the normal orcs, but still, they probably don't know, they would have to learn about the histories and, all that kind of stuff. So, and also Sauron, we know that he's one of the most kind of cunning, and like his voice was so powerful. He could basically twist anyone. There's a quote, I think, from Aragorn saying that maybe the only people in Middle Earth who could not be turned by Sauron were Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf. He was like pretty much everybody else could possibly be turned by Sauron. Which is something else to think about when you think of when everybody hates Wormtongue, and you're kind of going, look, he didn't have a chance. He was manipulated by Sauron. Like, he couldn't really
but he
avoid
was gross.
He was gross. He was really
gross.
greasy.
He was pretty, he was like a half goblin man.
Maybe he was. Maybe he was
he probably was, yeah.
Goblin
and
man
actually,
or half orc.
I do when you say like, are the orcs loyal to Sauron or whatever, I do kind of imagine Saruman's Uruk-hai as like their own separate race almost, and then like every other orc that was there before is kind of not secretly, but like there's a little part of them that's just loyal to Sauron, even if they're over in sinking Beleriand or wherever they are. I feel like they would answer to Sauron's call. But then like Saruman's corrupted and inbred Uruk-hai, they're their own thing. They're their own kettle of fish almost.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Maybe he used a kettle of fish to breed them. Maybe that was another technique he used.
That's what they stank.
Just to go on to another little quote here in the chapter called The Uruk-hai from the Two Towers book, Ugluk says, quote, "We are the fighting Uruk-hai. We slew the great warrior," speaking of Boromir. "We took the prisoners. We are the servants of Saruman the Wise, the white hand, the hand that gives us man flesh to eat." So there again, he's clearly, putting his flag in Saruman's camp, and he's saying, this is our master. And so there's none of this like, we serve Saruman, but we also think that Sauron's great. He's cool too. They're just kind of like, they're saying, no, Saruman, he's the guy that gives us man flesh to eat, which is also kind of a cool insight that he was actually just feeding them men while they were in Isengard. So that's kind of creepy as well.
Well, I mean, you gave the example with your dog and your boss, but like maybe it's a situation where they only answer to their boss, who's, let's say, the bank manager. But then, like, what if the CEO was to come down and be like, "Here, do you want to go to a party on my boat?" You wouldn't be like, no, I'm loyal to my bank manager. I'm not going to chill with you. I think Sauron is that CEO.
Anyway, but looking at the whole event, basically, of the Uruk-hai taking Merry and Pippin, they were clearly loyal to Saruman because, like, they killed other orcs from Mordor. They were not loyal to Sauron. They didn't search Merry and Pippin to see if they had the ring. They kept the prisoners unmolested and not searched as per orders. And so they were loyal and faithful to the service of their master. So they were definitely...
Why not molested?
So some other examples then of hostility between orcs from Isengard and orcs from Mordor, just to very quickly give you a couple of quotes. Again, from the same chapter I referenced before, called The Uruk-hai. And this is Ugluk speaking to the Mordor orcs, and he says, quote, "Letting the fighting Uruk-hai do the work as usual." And another time he says basically the same thing. A couple of lines later he says, "But in the meantime, the Uruk-hai of Isengard can do the dirty work as usual." So again, he's kind of saying, like, we're the ones that really get the work done, and the Mordor orcs are just, they're just, prancing around the place, actually not doing anything and whatever. So
what do they even do? Like,
just a bit of bitterness, I suppose you can see, was built up between these different types of orcs. So yeah, kind of interesting there as well.
Yeah, but you could look at it in two ways. You could look at it and be like, oh, they really did. There's a hatred between Mordor and Uruk-hai and the way they act. But I think when Tolkien's writing these scenes with orcs, it's just to show that they're just despicable beings, and they'll fight with anyone. And I think he just wanted to show a little bit of that. There's like, we're doing the dirty work again, and yeah, I don't know. It's they're just disgusting and rank.
Rank beings, yeah. Now I want to ask you one more question now about Treebeard as well. And so we already spoke about Treebeard before and how we can't really tell orcs and the other lads apart. And so if Treebeard, as we see in the movie, really thought that Merry and Pippin were little orcs when he first saw them, why didn't he automatically squash them like he did the orc who followed them into the forest?
Does that play exactly the same way in the book? He squashes an orc and then All right, so you're asking me on a movie standpoint.
Yeah, I suppose maybe it's not. Actually, sorry, I didn't know what you were saying. You were saying, is it the same in the book that he squashes the first orc and then he picks them two up?
And then picks up the two.
I think he definitely squashes an orc just before it. I don't know if it's like in the same motion or something like that. But yeah, I think he squashes someone and then he picks them two up.
I mean, unless he's stupid, he could see that there is a difference, and he calls them little orcs because that's all that come across his forest, and you know that's probably all that he's used to. And he's like, these are probably orcs, but they look a little nicer, so I'm going to call them orcs. But they might be something else. So he's interrogating them basically. And if we're just looking at a movie standpoint, I suppose it's because plot.
Yeah,
he kills the bad guy and he picks up the two and doesn't kill them just yet.
Of course.
So,
yeah.
But I don't know. Is there an answer to this?
Well, there is an answer. The answer is that in the books, Treebeard himself actually just explains this quite simply. He says that he heard them before he saw them and he liked their voices. So if I read a quote here, and I have to try and do my best Treebeard impression where he says, murmured.
How long do we have here?
No, I'm not going to continue in Treebeard's voice, but it says, murmured the voice, a deep voice, like a very deep woodwind instrument. Very odd indeed. Do not be hasty. That is my motto. But if I had seen you before I heard your voices, I liked them. Nice little voices. They reminded me of something I cannot remember. If I had seen you before I heard you, I should have just trodden on you, taking you for little orcs, and found out my mistake afterwards. Very odd you are indeed, root and twig. Very odd. So, yeah, he says...
I love Treebeard.
He heard their nice little
Treebeard.
voices. Yeah. It's almost... It reminded me of Trump there when he was like... I'm going to read that again. And imagine Trump saying this sentence, just be kind of going like... But if I'd seen you...
Trump's voice.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do it.
It's got to be huge.
Yeah. But if I had seen you before I'd heard your voices, I like them. Nice little voices. They reminded me of something I can't remember. If I'd seen you, it's just kind of completely going off on a tangent. Like, I'd just be like, nice little voices. Like, just
beautiful voices.
Really beautiful voices.
Absolutely, my favorite voices in the world. Do you know that? Do you know that the clip of Trump when they're asking him about the Bible? He's like, I love the Bible. I read it every day. And they're like, can you give us your favorite passage? I don't think I want to do that because it's very personal to me. And they're like, just even like just give us one passage. He's like, I don't want to do that.
I love it when it says the end. I love that part. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Which is your favorite, the New Testament or the Old Testament? I like both of them equally. I love
both.
Them
are great, beautiful
amazing.
testaments. Yeah, both of them. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, so that kind of made me think of Trump when I just heard Treebeard going off on some random tangent about how I was like, oh, they're really beautiful voices as well. But anyway, but yeah, the movie...
He must have been a really fun character to write as well, because like anything he says, like when you started that quote, it's like, your voices reminded me of, and then Tolkien's like, what did I say? It reminds me of something I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, he's a great character.
Whenever they say about elephants having a good memory, Ents definitely do not have a good memory. There's like...
Both have trunks. But
different
different types of trunks. But one has a great memory. One has a memory of a hollow trunk.
And yeah, very good. Now, just also to say that in the movie, there isn't really any sort of misunderstanding. And so that was probably, as we were saying before, it was probably just put in by Peter Jackson to increase sort of suspense and tension for, be like, now the hobbits have to convince this walking tree that they're not little orcs or whatever. So it's this nice kind of fun little part as well.
Yeah, it's good.
So yeah, so there we are. Now the final question I have for you today, Dave, is: did orcs really know what a menu was?
Oh, I mean, did they? Like there must have been inns on the way to Mordor.
Do you wanna explain my question to the?
Oh, sorry.
The
okay,
listeners?
for anyone that doesn't understand, it's kind of like a common gripe when the orcs say, "Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys," and then a lot of people go, "Why do the orcs know what a menu is?"
Yeah,
it's just one of those fun, silly questions, but. Yeah,
this is a silly question as well, and if
it's a silly question,
you give, it's going to be just like, yeah, whatever. I mean,
but
there are possible reasons for it. So what's your thoughts on it?
Well, there could be inns in Mordor. They might have, do you want the orc meat or would you like the human meat? Like they must have had a menu a la carte of different things to choose from. But also, like it's in Peter Jackson's book or in Peter Jackson's film, they're just Cockney orcs, and it's not. It never surprised me when I heard them say the word menu.
Exactly.
I'm sure that there's probably other words that you could pick out that orcs say in.
Of course, of course. No, as in this is just one that's really, glaringly
Really
obvious,
common.
I suppose, and this one that people have picked up on, and it's a meme that people use all the time. Like, how did they know what a menu was, and did they know what the soup du jour was and stuff, But the answer is like, there isn't really an answer because this is a movie thing that isn't in the books. Like, there's no part in the book that says, and then the orcs asked about the menu or whatever. So. But it is possible, I suppose. It's possible that they'd said that, because also another thing that we should realize is that Tolkien regarded the Lord of the Rings books as a translation from the original Westron language that the hobbits spoke and wrote in. So he imagines it that the hobbits wrote this book, and then that was in Westron, and then that was translated into English, which was the Lord of the Rings. So basically, it could be that the original sentence was something like the orcs just saying like, meet here now or something like that. And then the hobbits were writing that and they were saying, and then they said whatever it was, what the hobbits version of a menu was. And then that's translated into English. And then our version looks like meat's back on the menu. So it could be just something that gets lost in translation of stuff that's been, translated through various different languages and dialects and stuff. So there's that possibility. Then the other possibility is, that maybe their masters like Sauron, for example, who was himself fond of a glass of Chianti or some other red wine. Maybe Sauron.
Definitely a Chianti person.
Yeah, exactly.
I could just see him sipping it and go.
Exactly. Yeah. Chianti is delicious, by the way. I don't know. I always had like bad ideas of Chianti from like Silence of the Lambs, but
well, did you eat a human with your Chianti?
I didn't have some liver with some fava beans. Or anything like that as I was sipping on my Chianti. But Chianti. If you ever go to Italy, that's the best wine, in my opinion. But maybe Sauron referred to a menu that he was, he's having a dinner party and having guests over. He's like, what should I put on the menu? They're just, maybe they could have just picked up on the lingo. Or, as we said, maybe the orcs weren't as uncivilized as they appear in the movies, and maybe, like you said, maybe in Mordor there could have been some taverns, and there could have been some taverns, and there could have been some places where they just, or maybe it's just like they equated it with whatever the local tavern was serving that day, and so they're like saying like, what's on the menu, like you'd say, like if you go into like Mum's cooking, you're like, all right, Mum, what's on the menu? It's just like, what are you cooking? Like, so
it's their slang.
Could be just their slang.
But also, in that scene in the book, just before that whole thing like happens, the orcs offer Merry and Pippin some food. I think in the book it says something like they throw them some piece of meat and they don't know what this meat is from. So Merry and Pippin, when they receive it, it's probably off another orc or another human. They don't even know what it is. So maybe Peter Jackson actually wrote a scene where Pippin's like, what is this? I didn't see this on the menu. And then the orc goes, what's a menu? And then they explain what a menu is. And then 5 minutes later, when they cut off the head, he goes, meat's back on the menu, boy. So there you go. It's just a deleted scene. And it's not even in the extended
It's a deleted scene. Yeah, deleted extended scene. So there you go. There's loads of other possibilities of what it could have been or what it might have been. So, we could speculate on that for ages, but I think we'll leave it at just those few points that we've given there. So, that's all the information I have on the orcs today. I didn't want to get too philosophical and look into the question of whether or not they had souls and if they ended up going back to the Undying Lands or to the Halls of Mandos or anything like that. So I think that we could leave that for another time.
Another different one.
Yeah.
A different podcast that needs to be discussed.
So there you go, Dave. What was the most interesting or surprising thing that you've heard or learned about orcs today?
I really like the question about who they're loyal to. I still don't really know the answer, but I like it. I like thinking about the orcs because, like I said earlier, in other fantasy shows, when they have that kind of cannon fodder of bad guys where they don't really have any backstory or origin story or anything. Tolkien has put a lot of thought into every single one of the creatures that he has invented. So it is fun to discuss the orcs, and there is so much more to them than we see in Peter Jackson's movies. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we did a podcast on it because
Yeah.
it's been good. It's been
And
good stuff.
Just before we finish, a special shout out to Ugluk, who is an absolute boss of an Uruk. He's so cool, and in the books, he's like, he comes across so well. He's strong, he's loyal, he's a fantastic leader, and I mean, he's pretty gross in what he does, and like, you know, he should be arrested for war crimes. But I mean, he's really, really cool, and he shows
You'll have that.
You'll have that. You'll have that. You know, that's it. So there we have it, guys. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation all about orcs, urukai, goblins, half-orcs, hobgoblins, and whatever other ones we mentioned in this episode. There really is such a wealth and depth to these creatures, and we hope you find these insights and opinions interesting. And if you do, please be sure to click the like and subscribe buttons. You'll find all of our social media links in the episode description, so please go follow us there and drop us a comment or leave a 5-star rating depending on what platform you're using. And don't forget to check out both the podcast and the YouTube channels. Also, if you really want to be the maggoty bread to our urukai, you can go one step further and sponsor myself and Dave, or treat us to a coffee by checking out our Patreon page. There's lots of other weekly Mellon Head goodies to be found there, and you'll be helping us keep this podcast going. Thank you so much to our current patrons, and a special thank you to Jack Knightley. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. We'll speak to you soon.